There is a symbol that crosses millennia, carrying a mystery so profound that it was revered, feared, adored, and ultimately distorted: the serpent. For many, it is seen as a threat. But for the initiated, the serpent has always represented much more than a crawling creature. It was, and still is, the purest emblem of divine power moving within the human being. From ancient Egypt to the hidden teachings of Jesus, the serpent appears as a guardian of sacred knowledge, a bridge between the visible and the invisible world, between the body and the spirit, between the human and the divine. What would have led civilizations so distant in time to revere the serpent as a master of light? And, more deeply, what does this ancestral symbol still have to teach us about ourselves? In ancient Egypt, the serpent was synonymous with spiritual protection, enlightenment, and inner sovereignty. The pharaohs carried the uraeus, a golden serpent raised on their forehead, as a symbol of their direct connection with the gods. This serpent, usually associated with the goddess Wadjet, was not merely decorative. It represented the awakened power of consciousness, the mastery of vital energy that rises up the spine and activates the higher spiritual center of the mind. The presence of this symbol between the pharaoh's eyes was not mere ornamentation. It marked the ascension of a human being to the state of embodied divinity. This image of the erect serpent between the eyes directly connects to what we today call the spiritual eye, or pineal gland, the seat of perception beyond matter. This symbolism was not isolated. The serpent appears recurrently in various Egyptian deities, such as in the crown of Isis, on the shoulders of Thoth, or as a protector of Ra during his journey through the underworld. But it is Thoth, the scribe of the gods, who offers us the most direct keys to understanding the true role of the serpent. Thoth was the master of sacred knowledge, of the creative word, and of cosmic order. In his texts, he describes the serpent as the guardian of eternal wisdom, one that, when understood, allows humans to transcend the limits of the flesh and awaken to their true nature. Here, the serpent is not a threat. It is an invitation to profound transformation. When we observe the Egyptian creation myth, we note that the universe emerges from Nun, the primordial ocean, and from the chaos arises the serpent Mehen, coiling itself around Ra to protect him during his nightly journey. This serpent, far from being malicious, represents the cosmic intelligence that organizes darkness. It guides the solar bark through the dangers of the night, allowing the rebirth of the sun each morning. In this mythology, the serpent is not destructive, but regenerative. It is closely tied to the cycle of death and rebirth, a profound metaphor for the spiritual evolution of the soul. It is at this point that the snake reveals itself not only as a cultural symbol, but as an active force within each human being. The Egyptians understood that the inner snake could be awakened through rituals, meditation, silence, and purification. The movement of the snake was a subtle language that spoke to the soul, leading the initiate through internal stages of purification and ascension. This concept is mirrored in the idea of Kundalini in the Vedic traditions, a serpentine energy dormant at the base of the spine, which, when awakened, spirals up to the top of the head, activating the consciousness centers and unifying the being with the divine. The snake, therefore, is an invisible master. Its movement is internal, its teaching is silent, and for that very reason, it was so feared by those who could not understand it. Because it represents self-control, the sovereignty of the spirit over the matter, the awakening of what was asleep. It is a threat only to ignorance and external control. Over time, as empires consolidated and institutionalized religions took shape, the symbol of the snake began to be inverted. From the light, it was pushed into the shadows. From the temple, it was exiled to the desert. But the ancestral memory remains alive, pulsating in every tradition that dared to preserve the true meaning of this archetype. Not by chance, in the myth of Isis and Osiris, when Osiris is dismembered by Set, it is Isis, the Great Mother, who collects his pieces and, with the help of Thoth and the sacred serpent, rebuilds him and brings him back to life. This act of gathering what has been fragmented is at the heart of the spiritual process. The serpent appears here as an agent of rebirth, and it is this same process that we will see echoed in the later teachings of Jesus, where the restoration of inner unity, the overcoming of duality, and the birth of a new being are central. The wisdom of the snake cannot be taught in words, only experienced in silence. It is the wisdom of the body, of breath, of deep silence where the spirit resides. That's why the Egyptians placed it on the foreheads of the initiates, as a sign that that person had awakened their inner light. It was a call to those who understood that true enlightenment is not something sought outside, but rather something that is unveiled within. And yet this wisdom, no matter how ancient, was not confined to the Nile Valley. It traveled through time, crossed borders, and found a new body to manifest itself. A body born in Bethlehem, a refugee in Egypt, who would later be called Christ. But before becoming the symbol of a faith, this man was initiated into the mysteries. He walked the same stone corridors where Egyptian priests invoked the light. He saw the same symbols. He breathed the same silence. And in front of the same serpent, he understood the same call: to awaken humanity to the forgotten divinity. The question that disturbs us then is inevitable. What exactly did Jesus learn in Egypt? And why has this aspect of his journey been concealed for so many centuries? The answer, as we will see, is as close as our own breath, and as deep as the serpent that sleeps within us. Long before temples were erected in marble and crosses were planted on the tops of hills, there were the silent stone corridors of the mystery schools of ancient Egypt. These places were not open to the public, nor were they known to the common eye. Hidden among colossal columns and hieroglyphs that seemed merely ornamental, these sanctuaries were, in fact, laboratories of the soul, places where the chosen underwent intense trials to awaken the latent power that dwells within each human being. The Egyptian initiation was not a superficial ceremony, but a symbolic death and real rebirth, a process of complete reconstruction of the self. The main mystery schools flourished in centers such as Heliopolis, Abydos, Karnak, and Luxor. Each possessed its own set of teachings, but all were connected by the same essence: the mastery of internal forces through integration with cosmic principles. In Luxor, for example, the temple corridors were not just physical structures, but representations of the soul's inner path. As the initiate walked through these spaces, they were guided by silent masters through the 12 inner chambers, symbols of the 12 aspects of the self that needed to be purified, understood, and transmuted. It was a living journey, made in flesh, spirit, and consciousness, whose end goal was the total reintegration with the original light. During this process, the snake emerged as both guide and trial. Some traditions recount that at a certain point in the journey, the initiate was led to an underground chamber where they were required to remain in complete silence for days, accompanied only by darkness and the symbolic or literal presence of snakes. This was not just a physical test, but an energetic and psychic one. It was necessary to overcome personal fears, attachments, doubts, and illusions. What died there was not the body, but the ego, and what was born was the conscious spirit. The snake, moving subtly and precisely, symbolized the energy of the soul rising from the foundations of the being to the internal heavens, activating what the Egyptians called the Eye of Horus. This activation involved more than just symbols. It was a real process. The Egyptians recognized two fundamental aspects of the soul: the Ka, the individual life force, and the Ba, the eternal spiritual essence. For the true initiation to occur, the Ka needed to be purified and elevated, and the Ba needed to be reintegrated into earthly consciousness. The serpent represented exactly this link, the bridge between the Ka and the Ba, between the earthly and the heavenly. It was the conductor of the inner light, and for this reason, revered as a sacred being, not out of blind worship, but through a profound recognition of its spiritual function. In texts such as the Book of the Dead, more appropriately called the Book of Coming Forth by Day, we find numerous references to the serpent as an entity of protection and transition. Mayhen, the cosmic serpent, coils around the boat of Ra to guide and protect him on his journey through the underworld. This underworld is not the hell of later dogmas, but the unconscious of the self, a symbolic field where every fear, desire, attachment, and memory must be confronted. Overcoming the serpents of darkness means mastering the internal serpents of ignorance. The victory, in this case, is not external, but the realization of one's own light. The initiate, upon completing their journey, was not merely someone who learned, but someone who became. The temple transformed them from the inside out, and for that reason, there was no certificate, no applause, no hierarchy. There was only a new being. The priests who conducted these initiations were not superior, but living mirrors of what the initiate could come to be. They served as channels of light, keeping the temple's energy alive and protected. Every word was measured, every gesture was sacred, every silence filled with power. These traditions were not upheld by books, but by direct transmission, oral, energetic, intuitive. The teachings were passed from master to disciple in environments protected by seals and rituals. It was not allowed for this knowledge to fall into the hands of those seeking power, fame, or control. For this reason, many of the secrets of the mystery schools were lost over time, or rather, concealed, tucked away in the folds of time, waiting for souls who could access them again. But one truth remains. Those who walk the path of the serpent never forget it. It leaves invisible marks on the soul. The Egyptian temple was conceived as a representation of the human body and the universe at the same time. While traversing it, the initiate learned not only about the stars and the gods, but about themselves. Each room was a part of the body, a stage of the spirit. The starry ceiling, the hieroglyphs, the obelisks. Everything was alive, everything was symbolic, everything had a purpose. The final enlightenment was not achieved at the end of a lesson, but at the moment when the being merged with the whole. The serpent, at this stage, was no longer external. It became part of the awakened consciousness itself. Understanding this journey is essential to delve into the lesser-told story of Jesus. For many are unaware that, during the so-called lost years, between his childhood and the beginning of his public life, Jesus spent a significant period in Egypt, and it was not by chance. The canonical Gospels are silent about this time, but other records and traditions tell us a different story. They point to Egypt not only as a refuge from childhood, but as the true field of spiritual preparation for Christ. It was there that he would have received the first breaths of ancestral wisdom. It was there that he would have walked the same stone corridors, heard the same sacred chants, and faced the same trials of the soul. If this is the case, and everything suggests it is, then Jesus not only knew the teachings of the Serpent of Light, but also incorporated, refined, and transmitted them in a new language. His miracles, his speeches, his presence, everything carries echoes of this profound knowledge. But how exactly did this transition occur? How did the light of Egypt ignite the torch that he would carry to the world? There is a blank space in the official accounts of Jesus' life. Between his 12 years, when he astonishes the scholars in the temple, and his 30 years, when he begins his public mission, there extends a silence that the canonical Gospels do not explain, a chronological abyss of 18 years, which, for the scholars of esotericism and ancient traditions, is far from being empty. In fact, this space is the veil that covers the deepest and most revealing part of his journey. His spiritual learning, his silent immersion in the ancestral traditions that prepared him to manifest the Christ. And Egypt, land of pharaohs, mysteries, and serpents of light, is not just a backdrop to this journey, it is one of its hidden pillars. It's important to remember that Jesus lived in a time when Egypt was still drawing the last breaths of its spiritual splendor. Alexandria, the great metropolis of the time, was a melting pot of cultures, knowledge, and traditions. Greeks, Romans, Jews, Egyptians, and Easterners lived under the same light. It was there that the sacred manuscripts were found, where science and religion still walked hand in hand, and where schools of wisdom maintained, albeit veiled, the flame of ancient teachings. It is no coincidence that, after the birth of Jesus, the Holy Family fled to Egypt, finding refuge there, but also perhaps a lost spiritual lineage. The esoteric tradition asserts that Jesus not only lived in Egypt, but also studied deeply with the remnants of the mystery schools, learning from priests who still preserved the teachings of Thoth, Isis, Horus, and Osiris. These schools no longer functioned in their former glory, but their guardians existed in the shadows, protecting and transmitting knowledge that escaped the destruction of temples and foreign domination. Jesus, with his heightened spiritual sensitivity, would have been recognized by these initiates as someone destined to fully manifest the Christic light, and for this reason would have been granted access to what was hidden from the eyes of the ordinary world. There are documents that reinforce this possibility. Gnostic texts found in Nag Hammadi, as well as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip, point to a Christ who spoke in symbolic language, deeply connected to ancient mysteries. His parables and metaphors resonate with Egyptian themes: death and rebirth, light and darkness, serpent and ascension, silence and the creative word. The very concept of resurrection, so central to his mission, is present in the myth of Osiris long before the birth of Jesus. Could this be mere coincidence, or was the Nazarene retelling, in a new guise, truths much older? The Egyptian Therapeutae, an ascetic and mystical group that lived along the banks of the Nile, are often associated with the Essenes of Judea. They lived in silence, practiced purification rituals, studied celestial cycles, and viewed the body as a temple. Their precepts were almost identical to the teachings that Jesus would later reveal: fasting, solitary prayer, communion with the invisible Father, universal love. Some scholars suggest that the Essenes, a group to which Jesus and John the Baptist were possibly linked, were direct heirs of these Therapeutae, and that both shared roots in ancient Egyptian traditions. In this scenario, the Serpent of Light appears again as a symbol of the path of initiation and enlightenment. In the city of Alexandria, knowledge flowed like a river. There, Hellenized Jews translated sacred texts into Greek. Neoplatonic philosophers studied the soul and its ascent, and mystics sought unity between the divine and the human. It is highly likely that Jesus spent some time in this city, where he would have come into contact with texts that combined Jewish tradition with the mysteries of the East and Egypt. His universal spirit and his vision of the kingdom of God as something internal, alive and eternal, resonate with the knowledge cultivated there. More than just learning, he would have integrated this knowledge, transforming it into pure experience. Jesus was not an ordinary man. His level of perception made him capable of absorbing, synthesizing, and expanding teachings that, for most, would require decades of discipline. He did not just read the words, he saw them alive. He heard the symbols. He felt the veils of the invisible. Because of this, his presence in the Egyptian temples, even as a foreigner, would have been recognized by the masters of the time. As in every initiation tradition, lineage is not transmitted by status, but by vibration. The call is felt, not announced, and he was felt. The temple recognized him before the world saw him. The serpent appears subtly but continuously in the records of its later actions. When it speaks of the need to be born again, it is evoking the initiatory death of the Egyptian mysteries. When it heals with its hands, it is using techniques taught in the corridors of the temple. When it remains silent in the desert for 40 days, it is repeating an ancestral purification rite. Nothing in its path is disconnected. Each gesture, each word, each silence is a living inheritance from spiritual Egypt, translated into the language of the new era. The connection between the symbol of the serpent and Christ deepens when we consider the biblical episode of Moses raising the bronze serpent in the desert, saying, "Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." Jesus is clearly associating his own trajectory with that ancient symbol. The raised serpent represents the awakening of divine consciousness in the human being. By comparing it to his crucifixion, he reveals something grand, that the sacrifice on the cross is also an ascension, a transmutation of matter into spirit, of man into light, and that this process is not exclusive to him, but accessible to all. In Egypt, this truth was represented by images and rites. In Jesus, it manifests as a living example, but the source is the same. The serpent, which unites the poles of duality, is a symbol of the energy that awakens, rises, and illuminates. The Egyptians placed it on the foreheads of the initiates. Jesus manifested it in his own presence. He did not come merely to teach. He came to demonstrate what happens when the Serpent of Light rises in the living temple of the body, and what springs from this is not only wisdom, but compassion, truth, healing, and transformation. This hidden link between Jesus and Egypt can no longer be ignored. It changes everything. It reveals that Christ did not emerge from nothing, but is the product of an ancient, refined, profound spiritual lineage. It shows that his mission was not to break with the past, but to fulfill it in its entirety. And that his true message, the one that transforms from the inside out, is closer to the teachings of the Nile initiates than to the religious power palaces that emerged after his death. But what exactly did Jesus learn during these years of silence and initiation? What wisdom did he inherit from the desert snakes, the forgotten priests, the myths that still vibrate beneath the sand? This truth begins to reveal itself when we open our eyes not to the literal, but to the symbolic. And that is what we will do now. Emerging from the silence of his hidden years, Jesus was no longer just a young Jewish man thirsting for justice. He was an initiate who had passed through the veils of matter, penetrated the halls of ancient wisdom, and returned with an inner light that transcended words. He had transformed into a living bearer of knowledge that, although conveyed in symbols and parables, operated on deep levels of the human soul. What he inherited from the Egyptian traditions was not a collection of dogmas, but a state of consciousness. The Christ was not a name. It was a state of being that he embodied. And this state, as the ancients knew, was the result of the perfect union between heaven and earth within the awakened man. The foundation of this knowledge was spiritual alchemy, not the transmutation of metals, but the internal transformation of the raw being into living light. The same principle that Egyptian alchemists taught in the temples of Luxor, that the body is a crucible, the soul is the fire, and consciousness is the gold, was present in every veiled teaching of Jesus. When he said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he was speaking of the great work, the process by which the divine spark sleeping within the human is awakened, elevated, and manifested. It was the same doctrine taught in the shadow of the obelisks, encoded in papyrus, and guarded by ancient priests. Among the inherited teachings, one of the most profound was the mastery of the word as a creative frequency. In Egypt, Thoth taught that the verb shapes reality. The word was not a tool, but a force. Hieroglyphs were not just visual symbols, but portals of vibration. By mastering the word, the initiate learned to order chaos, align energies, and bring to manifestation that which resides in the invisible. Jesus, in healing with his voice, in calming storms with a phrase, in resurrecting the dead with a call, demonstrated this same mastery. It was not magic. It was spiritual science, a direct inheritance from Egyptian knowledge about the vibrational power of language. Another essential aspect was the knowledge of the body as a temple. For the Egyptians, the human body was a living replica of the cosmos. Each organ, each bone, each chakra, or their symbolic equivalents, represented a part of the universe. Ascending the spine was like climbing Jacob's ladder, rising plane after plane until union with the divine. The Serpent of Light, a recurring image in both Egypt and the apocryphal Gospels, represented exactly this. The energy that rises from the base of the body, from the ground of the earth to the top of the head, where the crown of consciousness resides. Jesus taught this path not as a metaphor, but as a living experience. His fasts, his silences, his purity, his surrender, all were part of the process of ascension. When he speaks about being the way, the truth, and the life, he is not saying that we should worship him, but rather that we should follow the same path. The path of the Serpent of Light, the truth of awakened consciousness, the life of the unified soul. The Gospel of Philip itself, a Gnostic text from the 2nd century, asserts that, "What man does not know, he cannot save." The knowledge of the divine within was, therefore, liberating. Jesus did not come to establish a religion, but to remind us of this knowledge. He said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." But what truth is this, if not that we are potential gods, sparks of an eternal fire that we have forgotten? This truth was lived and expressed in practice. Each of his public gestures contained a hidden teaching. Healing the blind symbolizes opening the third eye. Resurrecting Lazarus represents awakening the dead soul to the spirit. Multiplying loaves reveals that abundance comes from alignment with the source. Walking on water shows mastery over lower emotions. Each act, a living parable. Each miracle, a rite. Jesus was the incarnate Serpent of Light. He manifested in his flesh and word what the Egyptians symbolized with gods and myths. And this made him not only a master, but a mirror. A powerful symbol that illustrates this heritage is the bronze serpent raised by Moses in the desert. In one of the most mysterious statements of the New Testament, Jesus says, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." This is a monumental revelation. The serpent, a symbol of wisdom and healing in the Old Testament, is now associated with Christ himself. The crucifixion, from this perspective, is not punishment, but elevation. The vertical beam of the cross is the backbone, the horizontal, the extended arms of the enlightened being, and at the center, the awakened consciousness, the I Am in glory. The symbolism deepens even further when we look at the Eye of Horus, an ancient Egyptian emblem of superior perception, representing the activation of the pineal gland, the throne of God within the human brain. This symbol is echoed in various sayings of Jesus. When he says that the pure in heart will see God, he is speaking of a vision beyond sight. To see God not with the eyes of the flesh, but with the eyes of the soul. The initiates knew that this eye is awakened when the Serpent of Light reaches the top of the head and lights the internal lamp. Jesus spoke to those who had ears to hear and eyes to see. The rituals of transfiguration, such as the episode on Mount Tabor, also have parallels with Egyptian ascension ceremonies. There, in front of a few disciples, Jesus shines with his own light. His body becomes pure irradiation. This is not fantasy. It is the climax of spiritual activation. It is the serpent raised in its fullness. It is the spirit overflowing the matter. The Egyptians called this becoming an Ak, an enlightened being, free from the shackles of the flesh, with power over life and death. Jesus embodied this. His mission was not to die for us, but to show that death can be overcome. That light is the natural destination of the human being. The tradition of the light serpent, therefore, did not disappear with the end of Egypt. It passed on to Jesus, and from him, to those capable of understanding beyond the surface. This knowledge, however, could not be openly shared. The times were hostile. Humanity was not ready. Therefore, he spoke in parables. He taught through symbols. He left clues for those who knew how to decipher them. And that is why much of this knowledge was hidden, repressed, or misunderstood. The light bothers eyes accustomed to the shadows. But the legacy remains. It survived in the apocryphal Gospels, in the Gnostic texts, in the teachings of the early esoteric Christians, in manuscripts found in caves and on papyri hidden for centuries. And most importantly, it lives within each of us, like a dormant serpent, waiting for the right moment to awaken. What Jesus inherited from Egypt was not just wisdom, it was a mission. To remind humanity that the divine is not distant but breathes within us. And if this light still pulsates within us, the question that now imposes itself is, why was such wisdom hidden? What happened to this teaching after the death of Christ? And who had an interest in erasing from history the light serpent that he raised? It's time to face the veil of forgetfulness and understand how the tradition was torn from the people's hands. What cannot be controlled is feared, and what liberates the human being from the dependence on intermediaries is fought against. The wisdom that Jesus inherited and lived, the one that took root in the temples of Egypt and flourished in the light of awakened consciousness, was too powerful to remain free in a world governed by domination structures. Just as the Serpent of Light represents the rise of the soul and the sovereignty of the spirit, it also symbolizes, for those who wish to keep the people in ignorance, a direct threat to ideological control. That's why, shortly after the crucifixion, a systematic and meticulous process of concealment, distortion, and eradication of the original teachings began. A light that promised to awaken masses was deliberately stifled. The most brutal turning point occurred centuries after the life of Jesus, during the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 AD. Under the command of the Roman Emperor Constantine, Christianity was transformed into a political instrument, What was once a spiritual path based on direct experience of the divine became an organized, dogmatic, and hierarchical institution. To ensure cohesion and control, texts were selected, edited, and many were destroyed. The Gospels that spoke of the inner light, of union with the divine, of the serpent as a symbol of wisdom and healing, were excluded. The teachings of Jesus were reduced to doctrines that placed him as an unreachable figure rather than a reflection of what we all can be. The repression was not only theological but violent. The Library of Alexandria, where many of the ancient manuscripts tracing the esoteric lineage of Christ were stored, was set on fire. Egyptian temples were looted, destroyed, or converted into churches. The images of the serpent, once a symbol of enlightenment, were cursed, labeled as demonic. The staff of Asclepius, the caduceus of Hermes, the uraeus of the Pharaohs, all of this was reinterpreted through a lens of fear. Knowledge ceased to be liberation and became sin. The body, once sacred, began to be seen as a source of guilt, and the soul, which should fly in freedom, was chained to the promise of future salvation, conditioned to obedience to an external structure. The feminine wisdom, deeply intertwined with the mysteries of the serpent and with the initiation schools, was also harshly repressed. Mary Magdalene, for example, portrayed in the Gnostic texts as an intimate disciple and possibly initiated into the same knowledge as Jesus, was transformed into a symbol of sin and subjugation. In the apocryphal Gospels, it is she who understands the deepest mysteries and dialogues with the Master on equal spiritual footing. However, her voice was silenced so that the patriarchal structure of the new religion could have free reign. The feminine, which guards the portals of intuition, spiritual gestation, and connection with the earth, was banished from the altars and the books. What Jesus taught was dangerous for empires because it empowered the individual. He said that the Father dwelled within each one, that the temple was not made by human hands, that the kingdom was here and now. This made priests, intermediaries, and control structures obsolete. His practice was direct, vibrational, experiential. None of this could be maintained in a religion that sought not only to unify the empire, but to shape consciousness for submission. Therefore, the Serpent of Light was converted into a symbol of original sin. The Genesis narrative was reinterpreted so that Eve, by accepting the fruit from the tree of wisdom offered by the serpent, became the origin of the fall, not of liberation, a mortal blow to the essence of ancient teachings. The Gnostics, who preserved part of this knowledge, were fiercely persecuted. Their libraries were destroyed, their masters silenced, their rituals forbidden. They were labeled as heretics, when in fact they were the heirs of the true Christic tradition. They taught that knowledge, gnosis, is the key to salvation, that every human being possesses a divine spark, that Christ is an accessible consciousness, not an external entity. They understood the symbolism of the serpent as ascending energy, as a bridge between worlds, as a code of light. And for this, they were erased. The serpent that once crowned the Pharaohs was cast down to the ground. The symbol that healed was distorted as poison. The energy that awakened was condemned as heresy. Humanity was distanced from its inner power and directed towards an external worship in which salvation is not achieved through inner transformation but through belief in dogmas. The Gospels that spoke of inner light, like those of Thomas, Mary, and Philip, were buried, literally, so they would not fall into hands that could reverse the spell of ignorance. During the Middle Ages, this process intensified. Those who dared to reclaim knowledge were persecuted as witches, alchemists, or heretics. Initiatic orders attempting to preserve fragments of truth had to hide under coded symbols. Templars, Rosicrucians, Sufi mystics, Kabbalists, and Eastern sages kept the flame alive, but out of the public eye. The serpent's light did not go out, but dove into the depths of the collective unconscious. It survived in legends, tales, oral traditions. It became a whisper where it once was a trumpet. The most tragic thing is that Jesus' own message was hijacked. He who came to remind humanity of its inner power was turned into an inaccessible figure, an object of distant worship, a symbol of suffering and guilt. His teaching was reduced to faith in his blood, when what he offered was the wine of consciousness. His body, the temple of awakened light, was crucified not just on wood, but in collective memory. The living Christ was replaced by an image that, although powerful, lacked the initiatory fire that he embodied. But the truth never completely disappears. It hides, disguises itself, waits for the right time. Like a snake shedding its skin, it knows how to adapt to the shadows until the right eyes are ready to see it. And that time is coming back. Today, more than ever, ancient texts are being rediscovered. Hidden traditions are coming to light. Symbolic keys are being deciphered. The Serpent of Light begins to raise its head once more, not as a threat, but as a reminder. And it is in this movement that the true mission of Jesus can be understood. Not the one shaped by the councils, but the mission lived by an initiate who walked through the temples of Egypt, ignited the light within himself, and dedicated his life to igniting it in others. The mission of a master who did not ask for worship, but remembrance, who did not demand belief, but experience, who did not sell salvation, but offered awakening. Now, with the veil beginning to unravel, we can see what was hidden. The light was not destroyed, just covered. And the serpent, symbol of the rise and the lost knowledge, is again among us, whispering ancient truths to those who have ears to hear. The question that echoes now is, will we be ready for its return, ready to recognize what has always been within us? The Serpent of Light, despite having been cast into the shadows by the imposition of fear and the structuring of religious control, has never ceased to exist. It merely fell asleep in the depths of human unconsciousness, waiting for the right cycle to emerge again. And that is exactly what we are witnessing now. The 21st century does not only mark an era of technological advancement or existential crisis, it marks the quiet resurgence of an ancestral wisdom that for millennia has pulsed beneath the stones of forgotten temples, beneath the ashes of burned manuscripts, and within the lines of neglected sacred texts. The Serpent of Light is returning, and with it, the remembrance of who we truly are. This return does not occur in stone temples, nor in grand ceremonies, but in the sacred inner space of thousands of humans who are beginning to awaken to something that can no longer be ignored. The intimate feeling that there is something beyond the surface of life, a deep call that does not quiet. The discomfort with rigid religious structures, the search for a greater meaning, the longing to integrate body, mind, and spirit. All these are signs of the return of the serpent. And each person who feels this inner urge for reconnection is, consciously or not, responding to a call that echoes from the time of the pyramids, from the silence of the deserts, and from the light that Jesus tried to reignite. Contemporary science, even with its material limitations, begins to fumble with truths that the ancients already knew intuitively. The pineal gland, located in the center of the brain, has been the subject of research indicating its connection with altered states of consciousness, multidimensional perception, and spiritual experiences. What the Egyptians called the Eye of Horus and the Hindus Ajna, or third eye, is now mapped as a biochemical portal to higher realities. This same structure, when stimulated by practices such as meditation, fasting, conscious breathing, and profound silence, activates sensations and visions that elude rational understanding, exactly as in the ancient initiation rituals. The energy of the serpent also begins to be recognized by another name, Kundalini. In Eastern traditions, this dormant life force at the base of the spine is described as a coiled serpent that, when awakened, rises through the subtle channels of the body, activating the energy centers and culminating in union with the divine. This experience, which completely transforms the perception of those who live it, is the same as described in the esoteric texts of early Christianity, where the body is the temple, the spirit is the fire, and Christ is the awakened consciousness. The return of the serpent, therefore, is not a symbolic idea, but a physiological, energetic, and spiritual reality that is manifesting on a large scale. Modern medicine, paradoxically, has also preserved a symbol of this ancient knowledge. The caduceus, the staff with two intertwined serpents, still used today as an emblem of healing. This symbol, originating from the staff of Hermes and deeply connected to Egyptian medicine and alchemy, represents precisely the flow of vital energy through the human body, the balance between polarities, the rise of consciousness, the union of opposites. The fact that it has been maintained as a symbol of health is not by chance, but ancestral memory crystallized in the collective unconscious. The healing serpent has never ceased to exist. It has merely been shifted to a plane where few knew how to interpret it. Error during translation. The server is overloaded or not ready yet. This movement is also reflected in a new interpretation of the sacred texts. Increasingly, scholars, mystics, and seekers are abandoning the literal interpretation and beginning to decipher the symbolic layers of the Bible, the apocryphal Gospels, and other ancient writings. When reading the Gospels with the eyes of the initiated, it is discovered that Jesus spoke in codes. He did not want to be understood by everyone, but by those who had eyes to see and ears to hear, and now, centuries later, these eyes and ears are beginning to open. The Serpent of Light is returning to its legitimate place, not as an enemy, but as a guide. The spiritual awakening that marks this era is not casual. It is part of a larger cycle. The ancients spoke of astrological ages, cycles of gold and darkness, highs and lows of collective consciousness. And whenever humanity strays too far from its essence, a new impulse to return emerges. The serpent is this impulse. It is the awakening intelligence, the rising fire, the burning memory. It's not about adopting a new dogma or following a new master, but becoming a master of oneself, a living channel of one's own truth. And this truth is not intellectual, it is vibrational, experiential. It reveals itself when the serpent rises. The light serpent is also linked to human DNA. Recent research in biology and quantum physics points to a double helix structure that resonates with the symbol of the intertwined serpent. Some scholars go further, suggesting that there are dormant codes in our genetic material, and that spiritual practices, heightened states of consciousness, and favorable energetic environments can activate these layers. This is, in modern language, a new way to understand the same process. The ascension of the inner serpent, now expressed in the biochemistry of life. It is spirituality reconnecting with science, myth reconnecting with the cell, the temple reconnecting with the body. The return of the Serpent of Light also redeems the sacred feminine. In many traditions, the serpent is a symbol of the earth, of intuitive wisdom, of the universe's generative force. It represents the cosmic womb that gives birth to creation, the cycle of death and rebirth, the profound sensitivity that doesn't need to prove anything to be true. By awakening the serpent, we also awaken the energy of the forgotten goddess, Isis, Sophia, Shekinah, the hidden face of the divine that has been denied for centuries. And with this, we balance the scales of existence, healing ancestral wounds of repression, domination, and separation. This return, however, demands responsibility. The awakened serpent does not accept masks, lies, or escapes. It illuminates what was hidden, reveals what needs to be healed, expands what was limited. It is raw, pure, intense power, and for that reason, many fear its call. But for those who respond with courage, it offers something invaluable: inner freedom. The liberation that Jesus promised, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free," was ultimately the awakening of the serpent. The knowledge that transforms is not theoretical, it is fire, and this fire is back. Humanity is, once again, facing a choice: to remain in the comfortable ignorance of ready-made systems, or to plunge into the journey of the serpent, which, although challenging, leads to the light. The signs are everywhere. Memories are awakening. The veils are falling. And the serpent, patient, observes. It does not force. It only invites. With every breath, every silence, every inward glance, it whispers, "Remember who you are." And if we remember, if we dare to raise the serpent within us, then perhaps we can understand what Jesus truly lived, taught, and embodied. And it is at this point in the journey that we look inward and ask, how do we become living temples of this light? How can the body, this flesh we feel, be a vehicle for the ascending serpent? The answer, as always, is within us. From the earliest chants sung in the chambers of the Luxor temple to the hidden gospels that preserved the most intimate words of Jesus, a single principle repeats itself like a sacred echo. The human body is the true altar of divinity. More than a temporary dwelling of the soul, more than matter animated by an invisible breath. The body is the temple itself, the living ark where the Serpent of Light rests. The one who understands this does not need stone cathedrals nor impose dogmas, for they discover that each cell, each breath, each heartbeat is a living prayer, a liturgy of the flesh celebrating the divine that inhabits it. The ancient Egyptians knew about this. In their sculptures, the body was represented with precise proportions, postures that respected the flow of vital energy, eyes that gazed into the eternal. Nothing was by chance. They knew the subtle paths where the serpent climbed, from the base of the spine, referred to as the gate of the earth, up to the top of the skull, the eye of the sky. This trajectory, mirrored in the Jed staff, represented stability, the spinal column raised as an axis between heaven and earth. Climbing this staff was to traverse, layer by layer, the veils of illusion. It was to die to ignorance and be born into truth, not as an idea, but as an experience etched into the body. The Serpent of Light moves within us in the form of energy, not visible to physical eyes, but perfectly real to those who have developed inner sensitivity. It rests coiled at the base of the spine, waiting for the conscious call. This call does not happen through words, but by vibration. Through silence, mindful breathing, profound meditation, and inner alignment, the body begins to vibrate at a different frequency. The energy centers, known today as chakras, are like portals that open as this serpent rises, illuminating, purifying, awakening. At each level, a new consciousness reveals itself. At each stage, a veil is lifted. It is through this process that we understand the deepest meaning of Jesus' words. When he says, "The kingdom of God is within you," he is referring to this living temple. When he asserts that "you are the light of the world," he is referring to the light of the serpent that, when raised, illuminates the entire body, making the human being a mirror of the divine. Jesus knew the sacred science of the incarnation of light. He wasn't talking about blind faith, but about inner realities. That's why he fasted. That's why he retreated to the desert. That's why he sought silence. He prepared the body as one prepares an altar, so that the divine presence could fully manifest itself. Human anatomy, when viewed with initiated eyes, reveals a sacred architecture. The spinal column is the axis of the inner world, with 33 vertebrae that symbolically correspond to the 33 years of Jesus' life until his crucifixion, an event that, from this perspective, represents the total ascent of the serpent to the skull, where it is crucified and transformed into pure light. The brain, with its two hemispheres, is the Holy of Holies. The pineal gland, hidden in the center of the brain, is the throne of God, the point where individual consciousness meets the unified consciousness. When the Serpent of Light reaches this point, the initiate experiences what the ancients called enlightenment, samadhi, or mystical union. This process is not reserved for a select few. It is the natural destiny of every human being who decides to become conscious. But for this, it is necessary to purify the temple. This does not mean denying the body, as certain dogmatic currents have done, but consecrating it. The body is not an obstacle, it is an instrument. The serpent does not ascend in a dirty temple, on an abandoned altar. This is why Jesus spoke of the importance of purity, forgiveness, surrender, humility, not as moralism, but as cleaning the channel through which the light will pass. Every thought, every emotion, every choice shapes the vibrational state of the temple. Love, gratitude, and silence are the fragrances that attract the divine presence. The practices that favor the awakening of the serpent are universal. Conscious fasting, rhythmic breathing, full attention to the present moment, inner silence, surrender to the divine without dogmas. It's not necessary to flee from the world, but to bring heaven to earth through the body. The path of the serpent is not escape, it's simultaneous descent and ascension. It descends to the root of existence to cleanse what is dark, ascends up the spine to transform density into light. It's an alchemical process, lived step by step, with patience and reverence. Each stage is a death and a rebirth. Each open chakra is a door that closes to the past and opens to the eternal now. The serpent also manifests itself in dreams, in visions, in insights that arise when the mind quiets. It speaks through symbols, as it spoke to the Egyptian initiates. A golden serpent climbing up the spine, a subtle fire that warms the center of the chest, a high-pitched sound that pulses in the middle of the forehead. These manifestations are not delusions, but signs. Signs that the temple is alive, signs that the light is near, and when this light stabilizes, the human being becomes something else. Anger gives way to compassion, fear is dissolved by trust, the ego bows before the silence of the spirit. The body vibrates like a harp tuned by the invisible hand of the divine. At this point, the separation between the sacred and the profane disappears. Eating becomes an act of reverence. Walking, a gesture of gratitude. Speaking, a channel for truth. The whole body becomes an instrument of light. This is what it means to be a temple. It's not about carrying guilt, but carrying fire. It's not about denying matter, but consecrating it. It's not about running from pain, but transforming it into power. The serpent, as it rises, awakens gifts that were dormant: clairvoyance, deep intuition, healing ability, unconditional love, unshakable peace. These are fruits of the Spirit, not acquired, but revealed. In understanding the body as a temple, we also understand the deeper, hidden meaning of the cross. The cross is not just an instrument of torture, it is a symbol of the awakened body. The vertical shaft represents the spine, the channel through which the serpent rises. The horizontal shaft represents the open arms of the initiate, in total surrender to the light. At the center, the heart. When the serpent rises and meets the surrender of the heart, the Christ is born within the being, not as a character, but as a vibrational state. This is the true crucifixion and resurrection, dying to the ego, being reborn to the light, in the body itself, in its own time. This teaching is returning because the time is right. The world yearns for awakened beings, for living bodies of light, for human temples where the divine can fully dwell. The Serpent of Light is not a myth. It's an invitation, and the body is the door. But only those who accept the call can cross it. It's not a journey for many, but for the true ones. It's not for those who seek power, but for those who seek truth. And it only reveals itself to those who enter within with courage, humility, and silence. When we look at Jesus in this light, he ceases to be just a historical figure and becomes the living map of the path. He showed how the body can be a temple, how the serpent can rise, how the light can become flesh and dwell among us. He did not come to be worshipped, but to be followed. Not to be an idol, but a mirror. And when we follow his internal steps, when we recognize the body as a temple and the serpent as a master, then the story comes full circle. The question now is not whether we are worthy of this path. The question is, are we willing to live as living temples? To carry the serpent within us with reverence and courage? Because if we are, then the Christ that Jesus manifested will also awaken in us, not as faith, but as fire. And it is this fire that prepares us to understand the deepest mission of the one who embodied the light. Jesus' journey was designed to be interpreted only at surface level, reduced to dogmas and rituals, but under the lens of the initiate, it reveals another dimension. Each episode of his public life is an initiation rite, each word a code, each miracle a metaphor for ancient mysteries. He did not come into the world merely to establish a religion or to redeem sins. His hidden mission was much deeper, to incarnate, before human eyes, the process of the Serpent of Light rising to its fullness, to show the living path of ascension, and to leave in gestures and symbols the keys for each human being to embark on that same inner journey. Your miracles were not supernatural tricks, but expressions of transmuted energy. When he turned water into wine, he was not just offering a drink at a party, but revealing spiritual alchemy, the transmutation of the lower essence into something refined, the ordinary liquid of life turned into divine nectar. When he multiplied loaves and fishes, he showed that abundance does not come from accumulation, but from connection with the inexhaustible source of creation. Every gesture was a veiled lesson, a parable in motion, a practical revelation of hidden principles that came from the temples of Egypt. The accounts of healing are even more revealing. The blind man regaining his sight symbolizes the awakening of the third eye, the eye of Horus, the center of spiritual perception. The paralytic who walks represents the human being who, previously bound by their own limitations, is reactivated by the upward movement of the serpent in their spine. The woman with a flow of blood healed by a simple touch on her garment is the representation of balanced vital energy, the restored sacred feminine, the harmonized inner polarity. Nothing is literal. Everything is initiatory. Jesus' body became the very mystery school, where each action corresponded to a stage of the great spiritual work. When he withdrew to the desert for 40 days, facing temptations, he was reliving one of the oldest rituals of the Egyptian and Essene traditions, absolute solitude as the forge of the soul. 40 days do not represent just physical time, but a complete cycle of transformation. To fast, to be silent, and to face one's own ghosts is, in symbolic language, a plunge into the underworld, where the serpent must be awakened and dominated. He emerged from this process strengthened, not only physically, but spiritually uplifted, ready to begin his public mission with full awareness of his identity as a bearer of light. The Transfiguration on Mount Tabor is another milestone. In front of a few disciples, Jesus manifests his body of light, radiating such intense energy that his followers could not bear. This scene is not just a narrative, but a record of an initiatory practice that directly connects to the Egyptian traditions of the Ak, the illuminated body. The priests of the Nile spoke of becoming beings of pure light after completing their initiatory journey. Jesus demonstrated this in living flesh, revealing the fate of all those who allow the Serpent of Light to reach the top of the column and ignite the throne of consciousness. The crucifixion, superficially seen as brutal punishment, gains a new dimension under this perspective. The cross, as we have already seen, is the symbol of the awakened body. Being raised on it is the climax of the Serpent of Light reaching its fullness. The spilled blood is the vital energy being transmuted into divine essence. The sacrifice is not only physical, but vibrational. Jesus was anchoring the resurrection code in the human plane, demonstrating that death is not the end, but a gateway. On the third day, when he returns to life, he seals the greater mystery. The Serpent of Light not only rises, but transcends the very limitation of the flesh, showing that the spirit is eternal and that the body, when divinized, can cross the barriers of matter. In this process, Mary Magdalene assumes a central role. Far beyond the distorted figure presented by official tradition, she appears in the Gnostic Gospels as the disciple who understood the deepest teachings. It was she who understood symbolic language, who conversed with the Master on initiatory terms, who preserved the spiritual lineage. Alongside Jesus, she represented the reintegrated sacred feminine, the necessary polarity for the work to be complete. For there is no serpent of light without balance between masculine and feminine, reason and intuition, heaven and earth. Jesus' hidden mission included restoring this balance, so harshly shattered by patriarchal dominance and religious distortions. His legacy, therefore, was not only theological, but alchemical. The Templars, centuries later, when searching for secrets under the Temple of Solomon, were not looking for gold or weapons, but traces of this lost wisdom. The Rosicrucians, when encoding symbols of snakes, roses, and crosses, were trying to preserve the hidden tradition that Jesus had embodied. The esoteric, Sufi, Kabbalistic, and Hermetic schools that flourished in secret during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance were echoes of this same heritage. They all knew Jesus did not come to create a religion of worship, but to rekindle the flame of initiation, the path of the snake, the memory of the light. His hidden mission also involved planting seeds beyond his time. He knew that much would be distorted, concealed, burned, but he also knew that the truth could not be destroyed, only dormant. Therefore, he spoke in parables, left symbols, practiced gestures that would resonate centuries later. He was not just teaching, he was encoding. His entire life was a living manuscript, written in flesh and blood, recorded not on fragile scrolls, but in the memory of the human soul. And now, as the shadows of oblivion begin to dissipate, we can decipher this manuscript. The hidden mission of Jesus, seen in the light of the serpent, is inner liberation, not liberation promised for a distant future, but liberation lived here and now. He said, "The kingdom of God is within you." It is not in temples, it is not in external rituals, it is not in figures of power. It is in the body, in the heart, in the profound silence where the serpent rests. His mission was to awaken this perception, even at the cost of his own life. He showed that the path exists, that the serpent rises, that the light shines, that death is merely a transition. If we accept this view, we stop seeing Jesus as a distant savior and start seeing him as an inner teacher, as a guide to a process that also belongs to us. The cross ceases to be just a symbol of pain and becomes a key to ascension. The serpent ceases to be a curse and becomes a crown of light. His life ceases to be a distant story and becomes a living script for the awakening of humanity. His hidden mission was not to die for us, but to live to remind us that we too can resurrect in life. And if he showed this as the path, then the next step is not just to understand, but to experience. It's not enough to admire the Serpent of Light, it must be lifted. It's not enough to venerate the temple, one must inhabit it as a temple. It's not enough to wait for salvation, one must awaken. And it is exactly at this point that the journey reaches its climax. How to activate within us the Serpent of Light, how to make it the guide of our own ascension, how to respond to the call that echoes from Egypt to the lips of Christ. The knowledge that has spanned centuries, disguised in symbols, hidden in parables, and buried in deserts of silence, was not preserved to be merely contemplated. It was kept for this time, for this exact moment when humanity stands before an inner abyss, to remain captive of external systems that drain vital energy, or to awaken to the living temple that resides in every body, in every soul, in every being. The awakening of the Serpent of Light is not legend, it is not myth, it is not distant theory, it is a direct, urgent, and intimate call. It is the summons of life itself, asking us to remember who we are. Awakening this serpent means turning inward and understanding that the energy that sustains stars, seas, and galaxies also pulses in our blood, bones, and heart. It means understanding that each breath is a bridge between the earthly and the divine. This awakening does not happen by chance. It is the result of a conscious choice to purify, observe, meditate, align, and consecrate life. When we are willing to do this, we feel the first signs. A subtle warmth at the base of the spine, a tingling that rises, a sharper intuition, a clearer vision of the whole. Small flashes that announce that the serpent is moving, that the light begins to traverse the inner temple. It's not a quick process. The serpent doesn't rise in haste, it rises in wisdom. It tests each step, purifies every shadow, reveals every illusion. Therefore, awakening doesn't just mean experiencing transient ecstasies, but also confronting what was hidden: fears, pains, guilt, traumas. The serpent illuminates everything, and this light, at times, burns. But it's in this fire that we are forged. The one who flees remains a prisoner, the one who stays crosses the portal. This is exactly what Jesus demonstrated in his life, not to avoid the cross, but to transform it into resurrection. Simple practices can pave the way for this awakening. Conscious breathing is one of the oldest keys. Inhale deeply, hold, exhale with presence, repeating until you feel that the body is more than flesh. It's vibration. The meditative silence, cultivated daily, is another powerful key. In it, the mind quiets and the inner space opens. Fasting, whether from food or from the excesses of modern life, cleanses the temple. The use of words with truth and love also activates energy, as every sound uttered is a vibration that shapes reality. These gestures, which may seem small, are actually invitations for the serpent to awaken and rise. But awakening is not just individual, it's collective. Every human being that raises their serpent contributes to the whole of humanity rising. It's like lighting a candle in a dark room. One flame may seem small, but when thousands are lit, the entire night is conquered. The era we live in is marked by this movement. Thousands of people in different parts of the world are beginning to feel the call. Some call it energy, others consciousness, others the inner Christ. The names vary, but the experience is the same. An ascending force that opens eyes, expands hearts, and dissolves boundaries. Awakening the serpent also means reconciling with the body. For centuries we have been taught to reject the flesh, to see the body as an obstacle. But the serpent shows the opposite. The body is a vehicle, it is an altar, it is a key. Without it, the light cannot be experienced here on earth. It is through the flesh that energy manifests. It is through the blood that vibration circulates. It is through the heart that the divine breathes. Honoring the body is not a worship of appearance, but deep respect for the temple that we are. It is treating it as a sacred space, taking care of it with love, discipline, and awareness. Upon awakening the serpent, we also awaken forgotten gifts. Intuition sharpens, revealing truths previously unseen. Compassion blossoms, dissolving boundaries between self and other. Creativity expands, allowing new ideas to bring solutions to old problems. Healing manifests, not merely as absence of illness, but as complete harmony. These gifts are not privileges, but natural fruits of the tree of life when its roots are nourished and its branches reach upwards. What was once latent becomes alive. What was asleep rises in fullness. This awakening is also a return to the sacred feminine. The serpent, connected to the cycle of the earth and the mystery of the womb, reconnects us with the generative force of creation. It reminds us that there is no ascension without acceptance, that there is no light without shadow, that there is no path without integration. Upon awakening the serpent, the masculine and feminine within us meet, dance, and complete each other. Reason and intuition find balance. Action and contemplation unite. This balance is the true sacred marriage, what the Gnostics called hierogamy, the internal union that generates the living Christ in each being. But caution is necessary. The Serpent of Light is not a toy, it is not a shortcut, it is not a spectacle. It demands respect, patience, and surrender. Those who seek external power in awakening it run the risk of being consumed by fire. Those who seek control lose themselves in their own illusion. Only those who seek truth, love, and unity find in it a guide. That's why the ancients called it the guardian. It protects the portals, prevents the unprepared from advancing, ensures that only the pure of heart receive the crown of light. Even Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." This is what he was talking about. The great revelation is that this awakening is not a privilege of masters of the past. It is our birthright. Every human being carries within them the sleeping serpent. Every body is a potential temple. Every soul is an heir to the same light that shone in Jesus, in Isis, in Thoth, in all those who awakened before us. We do not need to wait for external leaders or distant saviors. The Christ we seek already dwells within us, simply waiting for us to recognize him and let him flourish. And it is here that the call becomes unavoidable. We live in an era where humanity, collectively, needs to choose: to continue asleep, bound by illusions of separation and fear, or to raise the serpent and awaken to its true nature. The spiritual, social, and environmental crisis we face is merely a reflection of the prolonged sleep of the soul. The healing will come, not from the outside, but from within, when enough living temples ignite, when enough serpents of light rise, when enough hearts remember. The awakening of the serpent within us is, therefore, more than an individual journey. It is a collective mission. It is a return to what Jesus inherited, lived, and taught. It is to honor Egypt, to honor the mysteries, to honor life itself. It is to acknowledge that we no longer need to live as shadows, because we were made to radiate light. And the serpent, which for centuries was feared, cursed, and rejected, now smiles at us as a guide, as a guardian, as a friend. It did not come to destroy, but to illuminate. It did not come to punish, but to remind. It did not come to impose, but to liberate. The call is before us, to raise the serpent, to make the body a temple, to live the inner Christ. Not tomorrow, not later, but now. For every moment is a portal. Every breath is an opportunity. Every silence is an invitation. What we do with this call will determine not only our individual destiny, but the future of humanity itself. And the serpent, patient and eternal, continues to whisper, "Awake. The light is already within you. Remember who you are." Mind unfettered, now that we've journeyed together through the wisdom of the light serpent and the secrets that shaped Jesus' mission, I want to make space for you. The question that remains is, how do you feel the light serpent in your own life? Have you noticed signs of an inner awakening, visions, intuitions, or energies that reveal something greater pulsating within you? Share in the comments your experience or reflection, as your every word could be the flame that awakens another soul. This is the power of collective manifestation. When we unite our voices, we create a living current of light and remembrance. And don't stop here. If this truth has already touched your heart, prepare yourself for the next step. On your screen now is the following video, The Hidden Prophecy of the Three Veils, What Only the Truly Awakened Can See. In it, we will dive even deeper into the mysteries that only the truly awakened are capable of seeing. The serpent awakening within us is just the beginning. There are hidden veils waiting to be lifted. Mind unfettered, your journey has not ended. It's just beginning. Click now and continue with me, for awakening is more powerful when we walk together.